So it's funny, I wasn't going to start this way, but since Tom mentioned it, I've been to Dubai, and I've seen a lot of those buildings. And I tell you, so I used to work for the U.S. Department of Transportation, and we went over there with the Secretary of Transportation. And here's the difference, and here's why I'm optimistic about the U.S. over something like Dubai, the Emirates. When you tour a construction project, particularly with a political official in the United States, every politician is rushing, rightly so, to stand with every construction worker and to identify with the men and women who build those structures. In Dubai, we're touring some of the new airport facility, the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. It was under construction when we were there. And they have these Eastern European security guys, mostly men, whose job it was to hide all the construction workers in these little closets. So as you walk by, there's little doors open and you see like 20 sets of eyes looking out. And it just tells you that we may not be building the tallest building in the country right now, but we still rightly put an enormous value on the men and women who make our structures and really appreciate that they are what gets the projects built. So you triggered me on that one. I wanted to start on that, so. I'm a hopeless optimist. Tom mentioned I work for the Associated General Contractors of America. Just for everyone's benefit, we are the Commercial Construction Trade Association, or the Trade Association for the Commercial Construction Industry. We're 104 years old. Our members, we're the only association that represents every aspect of commercial construction, union construction, open shop construction. We have chapters and members in all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia. And our underlying belief is this, that a thriving, successful commercial construction industry is absolutely essential to a thriving and successful United States. So everything we do is designed to make sure that the industry is succeeding and is growing. And we have sort of three main activities that we engage in on our members' behalf. First is advocacy. I was trying to find icons that represent these. Advocacy, it's our job to fight for, in Washington, D.C., in state capitals, and city and county offices around the country, measures that will support the construction industry, support demand for construction, and to push back against measures that will undermine the industry. We do a lot of education work. I had dinner with Vince last night. He mentioned that he went through some of our education programs and was at least polite enough to say that they had been helpful for him. We spent a lot of time really working to upskill the construction industry. A lot of our educational programs are focused on getting folks from kind of, I always joke, sort of khakis and boots, in the job site trailer into the C-suites. And then we connect members. Our job is to really make sure that our members have successful working relationships with architects, with elected officials, with appointed officials, with anyone and everyone they need to be successful. And we've been spending a lot of time lately really making sure that we're connecting our members with the education community, particularly as we get increasingly involved, when I say we, the entire industry, in actually workforce development and getting involved with those education programs and really kind of shaping how children are being exposed to career paths in construction. Just a little bit, Tom also mentioned that I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs and Strategic Initiatives. Strategic Initiatives covers a lot of sins, and one of those sins is that I'm one of the folks whose job it is to think about, look at, and make predictions about the future of the industry, largely because as the association that serves the commercial construction industry, we want to make sure that we're thinking about where industry is going and that we're taking steps now to make sure that we can not just represent successfully members today, but we can represent them in 5, 10, and 30 years from now. We actually, when we turned 100, we're a little younger than AWK, but when we turned 100 in 2018, we actually looked at, we wanted to obviously celebrate our past, but we wanted to look to the future. We created a future focus group. We spent a lot of time really thinking through what the next 10 years will be like for the construction industry. This was back in 2018, so we put together a 2028 document. But that really, the conclusions, and more important, the recommendations that are in that plan, really drive the business plan that sets our sort of strategic priorities as a trade association working for the industry. But as I told Vince when he called and invited me to come do this, it's one thing to make predictions 10 years out. It's completely different and a lot more difficult to make predictions that are 30 years out. But here's the good news. I'm 49, in 30 years, I'm going to be 79, and there is absolutely no chance, if I'm still kicking, that I'm going to be working at the Associated General Contractors of America. I love my job. It's a lot of fun, but I'm going to be somewhere else when I'm 79. So if I get it wrong, you can call up AGC, but they're not going to know how to reach me. So, but that being said, we're going to give it our best shot. And when you're looking out 30 years, we're sort of thinking about this exercise, we really wanted to look at what are the most certain, what's the easiest way to make reliable predictions about 30 years out? And our conclusion was that the easiest thing to look at are demographics, right? Demographics are like the aircraft carriers of the future. It takes an enormous amount of energy and inertia to change directions in an aircraft carrier. And same thing, it takes an enormous amount of energy or disruption to change demographics. So demographics is the first thing we looked at when we think about what's the industry going to be like in 30 years. Because that's really going to inform a lot of questions about what's getting built, who's doing the building, and how it's getting built, right? So couple trends to think about that will sort of be the foundation of these predictions. One, U.S. population growth. We're going to keep growing as a country. The growth is going to slow down a little bit, but by 2050, kind of cheated. I know we're supposed to be talking about 2052, but a lot of the data is on years that end in zero. So in 2050, the U.S. will have just under 400 million people. So it'll be a more crowded country, but that growth rate will slow a little bit, particularly sort of growth rate among people born in the United States as opposed to a foreign-born portion of the population. We're going to be a more diverse country. I guess it looks a little bigger there than on my screens, but we'll be a less white country by 2044. It's predicted that the U.S. will be a majority-minority country. So by 2050, the white population of the United States is predicted to be at 47%, and the African American population will remain about the same in terms of percentage. But what we're really going to see is a far more Hispanic and a far more Asian country. Both those populations are predicted to double as a percent of the U.S. total population by 2050. So far more diverse than we are today, and really, we're going to see an infusion of different sort of cultures and values and even languages on our job sites. More foreign-born, okay? By 2050, the percent of the U.S. population that will have been born in a different country will be up to 18.2%. Now, we all think back to like Ellis Island and 1900, 1910 as a sort of, the moment when you were most likely to bump into someone in the U.S. who was foreign-born. We'll be well above those percentages by the time we get to 2050, right? So this is and later I'll talk briefly about immigration reform and its play, but that means that immigration reform becomes increasingly important because to the extent that percent of that population is available to lawfully work in the United States will be a factor as you think about workforce development and who are the men and women who are going to be building the jobs of the future. The other thing is we'll be an older and a grayer population, right? By 2050, nearly 1 in 4 Americans will be 65 years or older. So this is kind of a hard chart to figure out, but basically the blue line represents the number of working age adults per older adult, someone who's not in the workforce, and then I don't know what color that'd be, sort of yellowish, beige color is the number of workers relative to children. And as you can see, the number of workers available to do work for the people who are not working in this country goes down and down and down. That means that we're going to have fewer working age people available to build the projects of the future, particularly relative to the needs, the future needs of the industry or the future needs of our economy, really. And then I know that there's some, my colleague Dan sort of is optimistic about climate migration? Was that the phrase? So I'm from South Florida originally, so climate migration means that everyone from New York comes down to Florida in the winter, which is something different than I think what you're talking about. But generally, as you think about demographics, it's important to look at sort of Michigan. I know AUC does most of its work within 90 miles of Pontiac. As Dr. Ehrlich mentioned, the population of Michigan is currently projected to decline slightly by the time we get to 2050. So, like I said, it's important to look at demographics because I think, the most reliable way to look into what the future is going to look like. And then that those demographics are really going to drive a lot of the change for construction, first and foremost, in who's doing the construction work. Or excuse me, in what's being built. I had my order wrong. Really, particularly in 2008, 2009, 2010, when the construction industry went through a depression, we talked about how eds and meds were going to save the industry, right? In the future, and I know that the medical makeup is going to change a little bit, but we do see a future in 2050 where demand for meds is up and demand for eds is down. Why is that? We've got an older and a grayer population. And when I say meds, I'm not talking about general hospitals as much as sort of the whole gamut of healthcare facilities that are out there, from assisted living, outpatient centers, urgent care centers, specialized medical facilities, that are practicing a lot of outpatient procedures for orthopedics, cancer treatment centers, you name it. We see that demand continuing to remain strong and really a big portion of the construction market. School construction, in an environment where student populations are shrinking and we have an older population, sure there'll be demand for school construction. I think what's going to happen is, even if you look at, say, the Dakotas before the oil boom, and the biggest political issue there was school district consolidation. If you got two high schools that get consolidated, there's going to be construction associated with making that new single one high school nice for the two former high schools. So there'll still be demand, but it'll be a different type of demand. You won't be building for student population growth. You'll be building to manage school district consolidations. I heard this morning that there are 900 school districts in Michigan. Maybe in the future where there are fewer school-age children, you've got some consolidation of school districts, and you've got construction that's being driven really to make those remaining facilities more attractive, better, more experiential learning spaces. University market. I think this is an interesting one. It's kind of it's feast or famine. The student population numbers for universities has been declining pre-pandemic. We think will continue for four-year universities will continue to fall. And we think in that market, there will be significantly fewer four-year universities in business than there are today. So you're going to have some universities that are shuttered and repurposed, and then the remaining universities, our sense is, will be kind of in this struggle, this fight to attract the remaining shrinking student population. And they're going to be in building wars to make their campuses that much more attractive to that ever-shrinking pool of students that are available. The other thing is that I think you'll see a lot of investment in career community technical colleges as people really kind of pick an a la carte education approach. I think we've seen over the last several years this sort of pendulum swing back away from everyone needs to go to college if you're going to be successful, and really an appreciation that there are certain skills that you might need to go for 2 years, you might need to go for a year, you might need to get your associates, you might need to go to community college that's offering some kind of apprenticeship style program where you come out with the equivalent of a journeyman. So there will be investments in those kinds of institutions, but the four-year institutions, it's either feast in that they're shutting down, there's going to be famine, or feast in the sense that they are in a building war to be attractive as they compete for those students. What else? Particularly in a place like Michigan where you're not going to see a lot of population growth, you're going to see a lot more renovation and repurposing as opposed to sort of taking 50 acres of farmland and turning it into a series of strip malls and office parks, right? So you're going to see, as you already see with the train station in downtown Detroit, repurposing for new, and that's a great example actually because it's repurposing to take advantage of new market opportunities. You're going to see older structures, maybe like the Ottawa Towers, and people think, what's the future for those? Do they need to be an office space? Could they be repurposed into something that's a little bit different, a little bit more open? So it really, in fact, I think where we're standing is a fitting thing. This was an abandoned structure that was sort of repurposed into a community and performance space, right? After having spent some years being vacant. That's really where the market opportunity is going to be in a state that's still going to have a population, still going to have an enormous amount of economic activity, but is not growing at the rate of, say, an Arizona, a Utah, a Florida, or a Texas. And those are obviously different types of projects. But you're also going to see, we talked a little bit about sort of the changing nature of manufacturing, but I think what we know, what firms are going to be building, they'll be green, they'll be cleaner, there'll be different types of manufacturing. and there'll be sort of more environmentally friendly buildings. There's sort of this move towards zero carbon structures is real and is going to continue, and owners are going to continually demand it. We're not big fans of some parts of the bill, so we refer to it as the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. But anyway, the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of money in there to encourage the construction of sort of greener facilities. That's only going to continue. So you'll see things like new electric vehicle battery plants getting built. You'll see things like, if you're building even a strip mall, is it Menards? My hotel happens to be near Menards, which is not a chain that unfortunately they have in the DC area, but Menards, you're going to now need to put in place all the vehicle charging infrastructure in the front of the structure as well. You're going to, we may not be doing greenfield development to build a whole new strip malls and office parks, but they'll be taking farmland and putting wind turbine pads on them so you can install the wind turbines, or taking farmland and turning them into solar orchards, which is what they at least call them in New England. So you'll see different types of investments, and I think Dr. Ehrlich talked about how the conversion to electric vehicles really sort of shrinks the total amount of employment in vehicle manufacturing. That's true, right? For every new EV battery plant that gets built, or EV component plant that gets built, that's 2 or 3 engine factories or transmission factories that are no longer necessary and to get shut down and need to be repurposed. So that will drive a lot of the demand for what is being built. Hit the wrong button. And then the private sector, public sector divide gets even blurrier, if that's a word, than it is today. Right? Especially in a slower growth state like Michigan, you're going to have a lot of public sector money that's getting involved in what used to be private sector developments. I think the picture on the left here is already from the entertainment center in front of the Little Caesars Arena. And then the next one is just kind of an example of public financed, seemingly private sector development as places like Pontiac, as other communities sort of fight to be the attractive, vibrant parts of a metro region. Communities will get more involved in the kind of development that typically was private sector funded. And that will make life even more interesting for the contractors as they deal with owners and they deal with the accounting for the work that they're doing, and adds a whole new layer of requirements on those projects. But by the way, it goes the other way too. As state and local coffers dry up, especially those where a lot of the revenue is based on growth, you're going to see greater role of the private sector in building what is traditionally, or financing what is traditionally public sector responsibilities. Public-private partnerships for roads and bridges, but that could also go for police stations, fire stations. In DC, for example, we've got a fire station that was built. It was actually a sort of public-private partnership. They built a condo building on top of the fire station, and that's how they financed the renovation of the fire station. That will continue to be, that will grow in terms of the muddying, the distinction between public and private sector. And then what is being built? Office space becomes a big question mark, right? Are we gonna see a bunch of old closed down office spaces, or are we gonna see hipper, newer, kind of collaborative spaces as people struggle to get people back in the offices? The demographics also drive who's going to be building our projects. It's going to be an older, more diverse workforce, and it will be a whole new mix of skills and experiences, right? I made most of these positions up, or at least I think I did. If they already exist, apologies. Biomedical data analyst, an autonomous vehicle maintenance expert, electric equipment techs, robot engineers, exoskeleton operators. These could be the positions that you're trying to fill in the future as we have a workforce that is really doing more to supervise machines or mechanized individuals than to actually do an enormous amount of the labor. Talked about building a Mars. There's one VC firm out of San Francisco that says if you want to know what the future of the industry is looking like, go to the most extreme places in the world, Antarctica and harsh environments. And the way they build structures there is the foreshadowing for how we're going to build structures here. 3D printing, robotics. We've already seen bricklaying robots, rebar tying robots, suits that are designed to sort of support repetitive motion and activity to limit sort of physical harm for workers will all be the future. So really, if you think about it, the model that construction will be going towards in 30 years is no different than high-tech manufacturing right now, where you don't have Laverne and Shirley sort of checking everything on the production line, but you've got a couple of really high-skilled people making sure that the machines are functioning correctly. We'll have a healthier, mentally and physically, and safer workforce. We'll have a better paid workforce. It's simply economics. If there are fewer workers out there and you need them, they're going to get paid more than the $36 an hour that's the average wage for a construction worker today. They'll be wearing wearables so that you can know if they're exhausted, if they're thirsty, if they're dehydrated, if they're too hot, if they're too cold, if they're sore. And so you can schedule breaks based not just on sort of a set schedule, but based on their actual physical needs. And increasingly, this industry is focused on the mental health of the workforce. We've got a suicide rate. I saw a figure the other day that for every construction worker who's killed in a job site accident, 5 take their own lives. So we've got a growing awareness in the industry that we need to be just as aware and just as focused on employees' mental health as we are on their physical safety. The other challenge is we are going to be in a future where not just marijuana, but just about every drug you can think of, every narcotic you can think of is going to be legal. Already they're getting their ballot measures to allow mushrooms and other, was it psychedelic or psychotropic, I can't remember the right word because I'm not a user, but drugs legally available. But we still exist in a zero-tolerance industry when it comes to drug place use, especially from the insurance companies. And it still remains technologically hard to tell the difference between drug use and drug impairment. So that's going to make it even more difficult to find qualified people to hire because everyone will be legally taking drugs but not able to pass the drug test you need to make sure that you're covered if there's a job site accident. As the workforce gets tighter and more technology gets on there, there's a real chance for political backlash from the public sector that it's now paying for an increasing portion of your job site. There might be measures. Every politician wants to say, I created X number of jobs by funding this project. Well, you can't brag about how many robots you employed, so you might see measures that say, hey, we'll fund this renovation of the parking garage, but you got to hire X number of people for this job site, which will make things more complicated. And by the way, union jurisdiction fights over which robot gets credit for which union and the work performed, these are possibilities. And then it also means what kind of training and education do future construction workers need if they're managing exoskeleton suits as opposed to figuring out how to mud or run conduit. Keep hitting the wrong button. Just real quick, how we build it, it's going to be cleaner. We're going to have zero carbon job sites, a lot of electric equipment and tools. Very careful about also sort of sediment runoff and all that, but it's going to be costlier because there'll be even more rules and regulations and legislation designed to govern the way that projects are built as the country continues to react to changing climate and wants to show that they're taking steps to address it. There'll be a lot more off-site construction. I know this is something that the industry's been talking about a long time, but technology really makes off-site prefabrication a lot more realistic and a lot more cost-effective than it's ever been. And so there'll be a lot less on-site. And that on-site work will be a lot more like assembly and a lot less like construction as you're putting in place units that were built off-site and just need to be slid into place, or utility packets or plumbing packets that were assembled off-site and get slid into place and connected, or bridges, or even prefabbed highway components. So the kind of work that happens on the job site changes in the next 30 years. But the equipment will be pretty cool. It'll be, like I said, exoskeleton suits, a lot more autonomous equipment, and that opens up the opportunity to really sort of protect safety as well, because struck-bys are such a high part of the construction safety equation. And then we've talked a little bit about virtual and augmented reality. That will be a growing part of the construction industry. Basically, you'll be able to build an entire building virtually and identify any and all oops moments before you actually get to the actual construction of it. So that should theoretically accelerate how fast you're doing, you're turning dirt, as opposed to, because you're spending less time fixing problems. And then you can even go on site, and with augmented reality, you might be half finished, you can see the other half. So it definitely technology becomes an enabler to get the amount of time you spend turning dirt to a shorter period and hopefully improving margins. Couple questions. In this future, what's the future role of architects? If buildings are being prefabbed and just assembled on a job site, do you need an architect, or do you go online and you say, I want component A, component B, component C, put them together this way, and I've got my building? Maybe that's far-fetched. What's the role of a general contractor if all the subs are doing work off-site at their factory and you're just assembling it? What does that mean for the role of the general contractor? I don't know the answer, but it's something that's going to come up. Does organized labor survive in the age of machines? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, and I'm pretty sure we'll spend the next 29 years figuring it out, so I don't have to guess how we do it, but it'll get there. And then how do smaller firms compete with big firms if it's such a tech-heavy industry, right? Who pays for the research? How many small firms have the ability to make sort of predictive bets on technology that larger firms can do easily? That's one of the things that we feel that we've got a role as an association to help identify and share information about the technology that will work. And then, as I mentioned before, immigration reform. Will we get immigration reform where that 18% of the U.S. population be available to legally, lawfully employ in the United States? We've got politicians that have spent the last 20 years talking about immigration reform and done nothing. Maybe over the next 30 years they'll get it done. Two quick caveats. I'm running a little over time, sorry guys. Two quick caveats. I mentioned demographics are the most reliable predictor of the future, but you could have another pandemic, you could have a war with China, you could have something that disrupts anything and everything I just told you. So when you do call AGC 30 years from now, I did put that caveat in there. But here's my final caveat. Now, I've had the privilege of working in the construction industry for about 14 years now, so not as long as some others, but I'll tell you, there isn't a problem that we've bumped into that we haven't found a contractor who can overcome. This is an industry that every day finds challenges and overcomes them, so I'm highly confident that whatever the actual challenges of the next 30 years, this industry is going to overcome them and be successful. With that, I just want to say thank you, and also we want to say congrats. Where's Vince? Congrats to Vince, by the way, on his retirement. So. That's it.